talking about the effects of Gladitia triacanthos thorn density on deer herbivory.
We would like to thank a few people in particular, Dr. Kowinski and Professor Nickel, for helping us with experimental design and providing us with different tools to use. We'd also like to thank Sophia and Kaylee, who helped us when we glued thorns onto our trees a couple of the days. And finally, William Joel College for letting us use the honey locust trees on campus.
So this is a floppy disk. It was a form of storage in the 1970s, and from then we progressed to store data on CDs, and then flash drives, and then we stored them on external hard drives. And lastly, in today's society, we use what is called the cloud. So the floppy disk is considered an anachronism because it is something that is not really used today, but it's still seen. So it was used as a storage for computers, but now it is the save icon in a Word document. So it's basically irrelevant and it has no significant relevance, but it's still here today. Just like there are societal anachronisms such as the floppy disk, there are also ecological anachronisms. An ecological anachronism, the term was coined by David Jansen, and an example is the Osage orange. In Boone et al. 2015, they experimented with horses and elephants and force-feeding them Osage oranges to see if the seeds would germinate after passing through the gut. The seeds did germinate, however, they're still considered an ecological anachronism because they're still around today, but none of the animals will eat them because they are too big, and the animals that used to eat them were megafauna and they are now extinct. So we are looking at ecological anachronisms concerned with megafauna and herbivory. You may be asking, well, what are the megafauna? The megafauna were browsers and herbivores that ate woody and herbaceous vegetation 2.5 million to 11,000 years ago during the Ice Age in the Pleistocene area. They lived in North America. Such examples of the megafauna are the mastodon, the woolly mammoth, and the giant ground sloth. Now, in this predator-prey interaction, the megafauna, which were the predators, were exerting selective pressure on the prey, which were the plants. But how did the plants avoid being eaten? They avoided herbivory through adaptations such as structural defenses, including thorns, spines, and prickles. These adaptations helped to defend against herbivory because when the plants were herbivorized, the megafauna would strip the bark or the tissue, and that was a loss of nutrients. One such tree that defended itself with structural defenses was the honey locust tree, or Gladitia triacanthos. It had thorns which were widely spaced along the branches. We saw these thorns and we began to wonder what the function of the thorns was. Were they ecological anachronisms, or did they have a structural defense that was still effective today?
So we asked if honey locust thorns are indeed an ecological anachronism and therefore ineffective in deterring extant herbivores, specifically white-tailed deer. And the reason we asked this question is because if the thorns are really an ecological anachronism, which were originally used to deter megafauna from browsing on the trees, then they're probably too widely spaced to deter extant herbivores, which are smaller than megafauna. And our hypothesis was that increasing thorn density on honey locust trees would decrease herbivory by white-tailed deer. And we also hypothesized that because thorns on honey locust trees are an ecological anachronism, branches with no thorns and branches with a normal amount of thorns would experience the same amount of herbivory, which would be greater than the amount of herbivory experienced by trees with double the original amount of thorns. And so our null hypothesis is that there would be no difference in herbivory among treatments. So our literature side.
These are pictures of where we performed our experiment outside the Schumacher sorority complex. In the bottom two pictures, we had two treatments. The first treatment was clipping all the thorns off of the branch, and the second treatment was gluing an excess number of thorns onto the branch equal to double the amount of thorns. So we had some branches that had lower amount of thorns, so it went from 6 thorns to 12 thorns, and other branches that had larger amount of thorns that went from 26 thorns to 52 thorns. And all the trees had at least 3 viable branches so that all the trees could get a full set of treatments, and all the branches were between 4 and 6 feet off the ground, so the deer could reach them. We measured herbivory by leaf and leaflet loss, and we collected that data by taking pictures over several periods of 3 days. We categorized it by using a paper with the sticky note that had the tree number, the treatment type, and the leaf number on it, and we compared them over these different, we compared leaves on these different dates to measure herbivory.
So after we compared the amount of leaves lost due to herbivory and senescence, we ran our data through our studio in a one-way ANOVA test, and we got the following results. Our p-value was 0.931, and as you can see from the chart, the mean values, which is the circle and the 95% confidence interval, they all match to each other. If the results would have followed our hypothesis, you should have seen the Superthorns below the other two means, so it would have shown a difference. We did not get that. They were all essentially equal, and they were all about zero herbivory. And two things to take note on is that we only had 7 sets on 5 different trees. That's not a lot of trees we looked at, which adds to potential problems with our results. And another potential problem was that the only tree that really received any herbivory was tree 1, and none of the others basically got any, which skewed the data a little bit. So as you can see, because of the chart, we were not able to reject our null hypothesis, which is the first one, which essentially states that herbivory in all 3 treatments were the same. Because we were unable to reject our null hypothesis, we came up with some potential explanations for what went wrong in the treatment. The first explanation is that the thorns were not dense enough on our Superthorn treatment. It's possible that we did not increase them enough, and so the deer just did not notice there was an increase.
And we can investigate this possibility in future studies by increasing the density on the Superthorn branches to say 4 or 5 times the original density, or simply by establishing a set number of thorns for each branch.
Another explanation is that because deer herbivory is spatially clumped, we may have gotten one area where the deer decided not to eat, and only tree 1 was eaten and all the others were just ignored.
And we can investigate this possibility by finding multiple locations where honey locust trees and white-tailed deer coexist. So hopefully when collecting data, we would have at least one tree that was herbivorized by deer.
Another important explanation is that we performed this experiment potentially in the wrong time of year. Fall is a pretty bad time for herbivores because the leaves are senescing and they lack nutrients. So the deer may have decided not to eat them because they were nutrient poor. Also, it potentially hindered our counting because sometimes we could not determine if something was actually senesced and just fell off, or if a deer actually ate it.
It would be really easy to investigate this possibility by performing the experiment in late spring or early summer.
And our final potential explanation is that deer just do not eat honey locust leaves. Besides that point, they may have learned through trial and error that eating honey locust leaves is a painful endeavor, and they may not do it anymore.
So we could investigate this possibility by doing an in-depth study of deer eating habits and diets. And this study would be significant because it's pretty unlikely that deer don't eat honey locust trees because the honey locust is a legume, so it's nitrogen fixing and it's nutritionally valuable. So there is a distinct possibility that deer maybe have learned to avoid honey locust trees because the thorns actually do deter them.
This is a very important point because although we could not definitively say if this was or was not an ecological anachronism, if the deer do avoid the trees because they have learned that the thorns hurt them, it will not be an ecological anachronism because it's still useful today. Any questions?
So, why is this important? Like you guys asked that before, why is this important if we find out if this is an anachronism?
Well, a potential use for, if you understand anachronisms in general, you can generalize from this particular case, for instance. So we learn more about, in general, how plants and animals work. Like, the trees still have thorns. Why do they have thorns if they're not useful? You can then generalize, maybe it doesn't hurt them. And you can then potentially take that example across other potential anachronisms in real life as well.
Yeah, because if the trees are still growing the thorns, even though there's not any use for them, that might indicate that there's not a great expenditure of energy that goes into growing the thorns. So they're still being grown, even though they're not necessarily useful. And this may be true of other plants as well.
So it's specifically trying to. Are there other known anachronisms? Like I didn't notice, but did you guys find like examples of some? And like this is just a study of are these anachronisms, and if they are, you could use that in another ecological sense. Is what you're saying?
Potentially, Haley, I believe you mentioned.
Yeah, the Osage orange is the green apple-looking thing. Some people call them
Hedge apples.
hedge apples.
Yeah.
That is an ecological anachronism because megafauna used to eat them and disperse the seeds because they were big enough to consume them and it wasn't a trouble for them to eat them. When they tested it with elephants and horses, well, they were still big animals, they didn't prefer them. And so even though it germinated after passing through the gut, they are still an ecological anachronism because the animals didn't want to eat them.
So I don't know anything about hedge apples. Do you saying the fruit themselves are an anachronism?
Yeah.
Yes.
The fruit of the tree is an anachronism?
Yes.
So how do those trees spread their seeds if it's not food?
If they're not useful now as an anachronism, why do they have
They usually just fall to the ground, and either people take them around because their primary disperser is
So
gone.
are they?
Well, do they like
serve a
just
different
from
purpose.
having them on the ground, the seeds will germinate? They don't have to go through the gut of the
It's
animal.
more helpful for them to go through the gut, but yeah, they germinate just on the ground.
So like, if the presence of anachronisms is like not serving the plant any purpose, why have the plants not like kind of moved on past?
That's a really good question, and we still don't know, and I think that's really important.
Is
for
there any like,
future studies.
have you read any like possibilities, any like?
I read a potential, like, even though we think of the megafauna as existing a long time ago, to a plant life cycle, it's not really that long. Like, I read 52 generations maybe, so they haven't, if it really is an anachronism, they haven't, like, got it out of their system yet. They still use it because it's supposed to help them. So, given enough time, if it is an anachronism, it should go away.
Yeah, because 11,000 years is actually a really short time, both evolutionarily and geologically.
I also had a question. You guys said megafauna existed
Before
in
you
North
move on,
America.
from that, because I want to ask a follow-up question. So you just said that it should go away given enough time. If it's an anachronism, is there anything you're currently reading in your lecture class for this course that might inform you as you think about the presence of, in this case, anti-predator mechanisms and why they might or might not persist over evolutionary time?
Well, for instance, if the thorns on honey locust trees are not harming them in any way, like if expending the energy to make the thorns does not hinder them, it probably won't go away. Because if it doesn't harm, why change it?
Because there's no,
There's no loss.
Thank you very
of-
much.
Yeah.
it doesn't cost them anything for doing it, and so they just hold on to it simply because there's no selection to
Get rid of it.
get rid of it or alter it in whatever way. And so it doesn't matter if it's 52 generations or 520,000 generations. If there's no trade-off for having the thorns, you gain the benefit of having the anti-predator defense at no cost. Then when the anti-predator defense is no longer useful, there's still the same level of no cost. Which is interesting and might explain phenotypic variation out in nature in some cases. I don't know if it's the case in this case, but maybe. Sorry, continue, Aaron.
I was just wondering, you guys said megafauna, you specifically mentioned North America. Is that just because your experiment was here in
Yeah,
North America?
that's just because
Okay.
the trees we were dealing with were in North America. They
They
could exist elsewhere, we don't actually know. But we were focusing on North America.
Well, there was an example, we don't remember what tree exactly it was, but in New Zealand, there were these giant moa, which were these flightless two-legged birds that were huge. And they ate the fruit of these, or seeds of these trees, and it germinated in their gut, but since the giant moa don't exist anymore, those trees can't germinate.
And they're essentially dying because they need
Yeah.
to go through the gut.
Selectively. I mean,
Yeah, so I mean, there are other examples, but we just know historically that honey locust trees are in North America.
this, I guess.
So you talked about the fact that thorns might be keeping the deer from eating the honey. Am I correct in saying that? Like kind of.
That was our hypothesis, that the thorns were still functioning as a structural defense, so they were preventing the deer from herbivorizing the tree.
Okay, so like you said that like the deer might have learned through like trial and error to avoid the tree or something of that nature. Like, is there a reason to like think that? Like, I just wanted to know like
I
the
mean,
thought
like,
process.
if you go up to a tree, you try to eat food, and you're stabbed, how many times are you going to go back there and get stabbed?
Right, like,
before you
I-
just stop eating them?
We had that as a potential because we didn't see much herbivory. That was
Right.
one of our potential
Like I got like
reasons.
kind of the like logic. I just didn't know if there was like, cause I mean like deer do their own thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was like a reason that
Because we didn't see much
Yeah.
herbivory except on one tree, we're like, well, maybe they've learned. Just
Okay.
a potential.
Yeah. Okay.
You guys mentioned seasonality. Were there many leaves on these to begin with? So,
At the
Well,
beginning. The trees
okay,
that we picked had
kind of.
several leaves.
There were a few trees, like tree one, there was one branch that had like 90 leaves.
It was a
I
lot.
think. I mean, this is just on like a branch that's like this long. It was a little ridiculous, but I mean,
Because of the quick changes, like we saw a lot of them get
Yeah.
lost in the first 3 days, and then we were left with the remainder of trying to figure
it
out.
was just
So
a timing issue.
the
Yeah.
time, if we would have done it like a couple weeks earlier, it would have been so much nicer to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
But
What happened was the mild temperatures kept going,
yeah.
and the leaves hadn't all fallen off the tree, so we assumed that maybe we could get the experiment done before the cold weather hit, and then about 3 days
Yeah.
later, it went from being 70 to 30 degrees, and then 2 days later, it was back in the 70s.
Mhm.
yeah.
So like, how did you decide? You said you had hard times deciding like whether they just fell off or they had
Yeah.
been.
Can I draw an example?
Absolutely.
So, honey locust trees are a deciduous broadleaf tree. So like, their leaves are characterized as like these axial stems with these leaflets running down both sides. So, we characterized senescence as using this entire leaf, and herbivory was by leaflet.
So the
Oh, I
herbivory
see.
would have been
Yeah.
if this had happened, and then senescence would have been if that was completely
Was that
gone.
based on literature or
Wait, was
like
that stick the stem?
eating habits of deer?
Yes, it's a stem.
The stem is the whole stem was the leaf. So there was like a green stem connected to the branch. That's what we counted as a leaf, and then there were individual leaflets.
Yeah, and like the stems are very fibrous, so I
Try
mean
and
it's
use field appropriate terminology. If you have a central vein, central stem-like thing going down the middle of a leaf, is that a stem? Or does it have another name? One of the I think confusions is you're using the term stem, and plants don't upsize stems, they upsize leaves. Leaf abscission.
So
We don't actually know the correct term.
Throw me a marker.
oh,
That's what
Here's a stem.
the leaves are-
A leaf is attached here. This is not a pinnately compound leaf like you guys are dealing with, but the leaf is attached here. you're talking about on your honeysuckle is just this thing. Honey locust has this thing with a bunch of leaf pins attached to it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this helping you guys
Yeah,
now?
I
Okay.
just like thought they let the entire branch.
No.
fall off.
Yeah, show us on
Right
the
Well, we
show us
don't
on the
think
here.
there are branches there.
From here to here is what we characterize as a leaf, and then these little individual parts are the leaflets. So if one of these little oval-like things fell off, we consider that to be herbivory. But if the entire leaf fell off from here, then we considered it to be senescence.
Is that where it occurs, I'm assuming? That's
Yeah,
where,
that's where it will fall off in senescence. You're not losing any of the wood, the branch. That's not falling off.
Petiole is the word that I'm looking for. Petiole, and
Yes,
Yes.
correct. Petiole.
Petiole.
Like,
Petiole. That's what connects the broad
Come
part of
back
the
at you.
leaf
Yeah.
to the stem. And that's where plants
Right here.
lose their leaves from when they have in the fall.
They're just like ours, but like way bigger.
can you guys go through your hypothesis slide real quick? I just confused.
This one?
I couldn't really make out what
Oh, yeah,
it
I
was.
wasn't.
Sure, yeah, okay, so, this is a picture of a branch with no thorns, and then this is a picture of a branch with like a normal amount of thorns. So our hypothesis was that if thorns on honey locust trees are an ecological anachronism, then these two will experience the same amount of herbivory because the thorns on the control branches aren't doing anything to deter extant herbivores. And so they'll experience roughly the same amount of herbivory, and that amount of herbivory will be greater than the herbivory experienced by branches with double the amount of thorns. Because, like, as you can see, that's really thorny. I don't know what would want to eat that. So that was our hypothesis, and then our null is that they'd all be equal.
Okay. I just couldn't tell because I didn't know if those little drawings had anything to do with it or. I just,
The lettering?
yeah.
That's how
No,
we
that was
use
just
the
our
pictures.
identification
So
system.
it's T4 would be the fourth tree, and then we had a C1, which was control 1. So if we had one branch or two branches.
I thought the arrow was a leading to. I didn't realize it was a greater than. Continuation, whatever.
So the broader question you're asking is, are thorns an ecological anachronism?
Yes.
Correct? And you found that no, they're not.
We did not.
Have enough significant
Yeah.
data
Okay.
to be able to tell
Okay.
that.
Do deer have other things that are potentially easier to eat out in the environment in the 21st century than honey locust trees?
Yes.
What would some of those things be?
I don't actually know for sure what deer eat,
Yeah.
but I would assume like other shrubs or bushes.
It's really common in this environment in Missouri that deer love and spend a certain amount of time in.
Corn.
Yeah, corn. I mean, why eat honey locusts when you could just go to Farmer Bob's field and eat corn? So it may be that they do eat honey locusts, they just don't eat them in as high a frequency nowadays because there are all these other alternative foods that are not protected at all by
On that, you could, if you did research, maybe consider doing research on what they eat, and then putting thorns on those things instead of adding more thorns to this, because you don't know if they like eating it. You could, I guess, I'm just saying.
What would be the point of that though? Because like we wanted to examine whether thorns on honey locust trees were an ecological.
It would be a different study. It would be on whether thorns actually prevent deer from eating, because as far as you guys know, they don't serve a purpose, but you can't include anything. Just because you don't even know if they like eating it, you just take a little bit more subvert route to figure out first if they actually will not eat things with thorns on them.
Well, we know
Yeah.
they probably eat, well, we know they do eat honey locust leaves because they're legumes, so nitrogen fixating plants, they really like them. So there's a really good possibility, chance that they do.
So this sort of follow up on Aaron's question. Just because you didn't find the alternative hypothesis correct doesn't necessarily mean that the alternative hypothesis isn't correct. It's just that you didn't find it to be that case in this case. Part of which might be that you only had 7
cents.
branches of each branch type. Which leads me to my next question. So if you wanted to nail this down, you clearly need more sample size. In your estimation, is it better to get that more sample size by having more branches per tree or more trees? Based on your experience and the results that you did get.
Well, honestly, because we had 2 trees that had 2 sets of treatments on them and then 3 without, it really skewed how we were able to do data. So if I were doing it again, I would do a lot more trees, and if I could, at least 2 treatments on each tree so that you can look at both differences in eating and fluctuations within a tree itself and then within the larger group of trees.
Where would you go to find those trees?
Well, we know there's more at the nature sanctuary. We know there's some other area back that way. Do some research. I'm sure we could find some.
Yeah, we just have to go to more sites because, I mean, there were a lot of other honey locust trees like at the site that we performed our experiment at, but either the branches didn't have thorns at all, or like they were too tall for deer to reach, or there were several things which made us like throw out some honey locust trees at that site.
You would of course want to get honey locust trees where you also have
Deer.
Yeah.
deer.
Yeah.
Is over by the sorority complex necessarily the best place to go looking for deer eating honey locusts?
I mean, we saw a deer by the sorority complex.
I did see deer exactly where you guys were actually.
Yeah.
Which is inconvenient because they sometimes cross the road.
I would probably go someplace not a college campus.
Yeah, there's always
So
stuff
while
you-
you do see them, that's actually a big reason why deer wouldn't want to hang out in those places. Although there are so many deer, so many different places.
I like this.
So like, maybe I'm just very turned around here, but an anachronism is like, it doesn't, like you're saying that an anachronism is something your plant has like doesn't serve a purpose?
It's something that is not relevant to the time period that it is in, but it's still seen.
But like,
It used to be.
didn't we
used.
talk about like, oh, you know, like why would deer want to eat like very thorny trees? So then I get confused because like isn't that the purpose? Like I'm confused about like, is the thorn's purpose to like deter deer from wanting to eat the trees?
That's what we were trying to figure out.
I'm
Our
sorry.
hypothesis, don't worry about it. It took me a long time to
I'm
figure
like,
that too. Our hypothesis was that since the thorns, they're like widely spaced apart, and we assumed, and research has been done, and that's because it was probably to deter the megafauna. We wanted to see if by increasing density and having them closer together, if it would deter deer, and if it did, then it would show that it is an anachronism because they weren't deterred by both the control with the wide spaced ones and the ones without thorns. Like they eat them equally because it doesn't bother them.
So you have a branch, and the thorns were pretty spaced out like that. So at first, when we were reaching in to cut the thorns, usually we wouldn't hit our hands. But as we began gluing on more thorns,
We got a lot of scratches.
Yeah. it became a little bit more painful because when we put them closer together and increased the density, it was harder to get into a space like right here to glue another thorn on because we already had 2 that were right there.
Do you think the deer could smell the glue and that's why they didn't want to eat them?
See, we originally used epoxy, which was like really, really noxious, but that really wasn't working for us, so we switched to super glue instead. I mean, I didn't notice an odor with the super glue. I don't know if deer would, but
With the epoxy, maybe. Super glue
probably
maybe.
definitely with the epoxy.
I don't know. There's a lot of potential variables. You know,
Right.
cars going
Yeah.
by, human smell all over.
Is there a way that you could control for that? Because a control has everything the same except for the thing that you're altering that is the variable of
could put glue on the control, like the same type of glue on the control branches, just not glue anything onto it.
Exactly. So you could certainly control for that in the